stop asking why your life has been pure pain. Here's God's plan for you. There comes a moment, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes during a breakdown, sometimes in the middle of a fake smile at a family gathering, where you look up, or inward, or maybe just into the void, and you ask the question that echoes louder than any scream: why is my life nothing but pain? It's a question that doesn't come from weakness. It comes from exhaustion, from carrying invisible burdens for years, from surviving things that should have broken you. And no one seems to understand. No one sees the weight you've carried just to appear okay. But I do. And, more importantly, so does God. You see, if your life has been pure pain, you're not broken, you're being built. What you think is punishment might actually be preparation. I know that sounds like a cliche. I know you've heard people say everything happens for a reason, but this is deeper than that. This isn't just about finding silver linings. This is about the architecture of your soul. When God has a massive mission for you, He doesn't prepare you the way others are prepared. He doesn't give you ease, He gives you fire. He forges you in adversity, because the version of you that can carry divine purpose cannot be soft, cannot be distracted, cannot be addicted to comfort or praise.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Let's get real. You've probably lived years, maybe decades, feeling like something was wrong with you, like everyone else had a map and you were dropped here with nothing but bruises and questions, and every time you tried to rise, something pulled you back down. Every time you trusted someone, they broke you. Every time you let yourself hope, life reminded you not to. And maybe somewhere along the way, you stopped dreaming altogether. But what if I told you that this pain wasn't a detour, it was the path? What if your life looks nothing like theirs because it's not supposed to? God's plan for the chosen ones is never ordinary. It never starts with applause. It starts in the shadows. It starts in the silence. It starts in the suffering. Because only through suffering do we learn to see. Not with our eyes, but with our spirit. We start to sense things others miss. We start to hear things others can't. We start to feel everything. And yes, at first, that sensitivity feels like a curse, but later, when you're awakened, it becomes your compass. So let me ask you something you may never have given yourself permission to ask. What if the pain didn't come to destroy you? What if it came to reveal you? What if God allowed the betrayal, the abandonment, the poverty, the grief, not because you deserved it, but because without it, you would never become who you were called to be? That question alone can shake the prison of victimhood off your soul, because when you stop asking, why me, and start asking, what is this shaping me for? You begin to see pain as sacred. You begin to realize that pain is the scalpel God uses to cut away the false parts, the personas, the masks, the illusions, the attachments. What you thought was loss was actually surgery. The toxic relationship that ended, that was God removing what was dimming your light. The job that crushed your spirit, that was God saying, I never called you to be here. The betrayal that shattered your heart, that was divine redirection. You were never meant to build your life where your soul couldn't breathe. But it goes even deeper. The reason your pain has been so intense is because your calling is intense. You were not created for mediocrity. You were not created to blend in. You were created to wake people up. And to do that, you had to wake up first. And how do we wake up? Not through comfort, through contrast, through spiritual pressure, through hitting rock bottom and realizing that rock bottom is actually a launching pad, the foundation of something unbreakable. And here's what no one tells you. People who are chosen often go through seasons where it feels like they're cursed, because the blessings don't come wrapped in gold, they come wrapped in grit. You don't get clarity without confusion. You don't get strength without pain. You don't get purpose without pressure. So if your life has been nothing but pain, you might just be sitting on top of the most sacred transformation anyone could ever experience if you don't give up. I know you've been tempted. I know there were nights you didn't want to wake up. I know there were moments you felt invisible, like not even God was listening. But what if in those moments God was closer than ever? What if He was silent because He was working? What if He was watching you, not to test you, but to trust you? To see if, despite the pain, you would keep your heart open, to see if you would keep loving when unloved. What if you would keep loving when unloved? Keep giving when empty. Keep rising when no one clapped. Because that's what makes a soul holy, not perfection, persistence. And now the shift begins. This isn't just about surviving anymore. This is about owning the pain, taking it back, transmuting it into power, the kind of power no one can take from you. Because it wasn't handed to you, it was earned, in silence, in sweat, in tears, in prayer. God's plan is never to break you. It's to build you into something unshakable, to make you a vessel so clear, so strong, so authentic that when people encounter you, they encounter Him. Your pain wasn't the end of your story, it was the birth of it, chosen by the fire. Why the most broken are the most powerful in God's kingdom. There's a sacred mystery that lives at the heart of every soul who's been shattered. The more broken you've been, the more powerful you become, if you let the fire do its work. We are taught to fear the fire, to avoid pain, to numb it, escape it, pray it away. But those who are truly called, those who are chosen, walk through the fire, not because they are fearless, but because something in them refuses to die in the ashes. And if that's you, if your life has been a series of bruises wrapped in silence, you need to hear this. You were not abandoned. You were being forged. The world doesn't understand this kind of transformation. It praises surface success. It claps for highlight reels. But God doesn't build kings and queens the way the world does. He builds them in obscurity, in the back rooms of suffering, in the long nights when no one sees you, in the quiet battles where you keep choosing faith over fear, love over bitterness, hope over despair. You see, when God wants to make a soul unstoppable, He allows them to be unseen, because it's in the unseen seasons that real power is born. You've probably felt like an outcast most of your life, not quite like everyone else, too deep, too sensitive, too intense. But what if that disconnection from the world wasn't a defect, it was protection? What if God was keeping you hidden, not because you weren't ready, but because the world wasn't ready for you? He had to prepare you, not just to carry the weight of your purpose, but to embody it. And that kind of embodiment only comes when you've walked through enough fire that nothing shallow can satisfy you anymore. Think about who you are today. Not the mask, not the job, not the outer shell. You, the one who's still breathing even after life tried to suffocate you. Is that version of you stronger? Wiser, more aware? That strength didn't come from books or theories. It came from the breaking, It came from losing things you thought you couldn't live without, from forgiving people who never apologized, from rebuilding your faith when everything around you screamed that God had forgotten you. That version of you is the real one, and it was born in the fire. Let me ask you something that goes beyond words. What if your scars were not signs of defeat, but seals of assignment? What if every wound was a portal God used to pour something divine into you? Compassion, depth, discernment, power. The more you broke, the more space you made for Him. That's why the most broken people often carry the most light, because they've been emptied of everything false. And only when a vessel is empty can it be truly filled. This is the reason your journey looks nothing like anyone else's. You weren't meant to mimic, you were meant to model something new, something raw, something real. And that's what makes you dangerous in the best way. The enemy doesn't fear polished perfection. He fears the soul who's been through hell and still chooses to love. He fears the one who's been betrayed and still chooses to trust, the one who's been abandoned and still chooses to serve. That's the kind of power that can't be manufactured. That's the kind of power that flips the entire system upside down. Then here's the sacred truth. God always chooses the unlikely, the overlooked, the rejected, the broken. Not in spite of their pain, but because of it. He chose Moses, a stutterer, David, a shepherd, Esther, an orphan, Mary, a teenage girl, Jesus himself, born in a manger, not a mansion. Why? Because heaven's power works best in earth's weakness. Because when it's clear that you didn't get here by status, luck, or privilege, no one can steal the glory. People look at your life and realize only God could have done that. So stop mourning the fire. Start partnering with it. Start asking, what is this making me into? Instead of, why is this happening to me? Because fire doesn't just destroy, it refines. It burns away the ego, the attachments, the illusions. It brings you face to face with your essence. And when you meet that version of yourself, the one that can't be shaken, silenced, or sold, you begin to realize, this is who I've been all along. You're not behind. You're not cursed. You were called. You were picked for this path, not because you were the most prepared, but because you were the most willing to be purified. And now, every tear you've cried, every night you've endured, every prayer you've whispered when no one was watching, it's all being woven into something eternal. The fire didn't come to kill you, it came to crown you. From survivor to servant, how your pain becomes your platform for divine purpose. There's a point in your journey when everything you've survived starts to make sense. Not because the pain disappears, not because the scars vanish, but because you finally realize what it was preparing you for. And that realization is not just healing, it's holy. You see, surviving is never the end goal in God's plan. Survival is the initiation. What comes next is where the real power lives. You didn't go through all that just to say, I made it. You went through it so you could carry something back, so you could serve from a place no textbook could ever teach. That's what separates the called from the chosen. The survivor says, I got out. The servant says, I came back to lead others out too. This is where your divine assignment begins to unfold, not in perfection, not in having all the answers, but in your willingness to show up real. Because pain has a way of stripping us of everything false, and what's left is something more powerful than any mask: truth. And truth is magnetic. People don't need more polished influences. They need wounded healers. They need raw voices that say, I've been through it too, and I'm still standing. That's what makes you a vessel. That's what makes you a lighthouse in a world full of noise. But here's where it gets deep. Your pain isn't just a piece of your story. It's the platform God will build on. Think about it. The very thing that tried to destroy you is now the very thing that gives your words weight, your presence power, your silence gravity. When you say, "I understand," it lands because you've bled where others are bleeding. When you say, "You're not alone," it heals because your energy carries the frequency of someone who's been there. That's not theory, that's transmission. And transmission is what transforms lives. Let me ask you something that could shift the entire direction of your purpose. What if your greatest wound was actually your greatest assignment? What if the depression, the abuse, the poverty, the rejection, what if it didn't just happen to you but through you, so that others could be freed by your story? That's the kind of purpose that can't be faked. That's purpose forged in the fire of lived experience. And once you own it, once you stop hiding your scars and start showing them, not as signs of defeat, but as proof of resurrection, your life becomes a living testimony. This is where you stop merely existing and start serving. And not the kind of service that drains you, but the kind that fills you. Because when you align with your divine assignment, your soul begins to breathe. You stop asking for direction and start embodying direction. You step into rooms and shift atmospheres. You speak and people feel it, not because you're trying to impress, because you're aligned. You're not performing anymore. You're transmitting the energy of someone who has walked through fire and came back with keys. You start realizing that your life was never about you. It was always about what you're here to unlock in others. That's why you had to go through what you did, so that when someone else is drowning and you reach out your hand, it's not empty. It's carrying the weight of wisdom. It's carrying the strength of silence. It's carrying the codes of someone who didn't just read about healing, they became it. And here's the most beautiful part. You don't need a stage to serve. You don't need a platform, a brand, or a mic. You just need to show up fully, authentically, as the version of you who no longer runs from the past, but redeems it. As the version of you who doesn't need to be loud to be powerful, who doesn't need to be perfect to be pure. Because when you serve from your scars, you give others permission to stop hiding theirs. That's how heaven moves on earth. Not through institutions, but through individuals, through you, through your story, through your willingness to say, yes, I've been through pain, but I'm not ashamed of it. I own it, I carry it, and I use it. That's when your pain becomes sacred. That's when your life becomes a ripple that shifts generations. That's when the enemy realizes he never should have touched you, because now you're not just surviving, you're serving. You've crossed through the valley, you've wept in the dark, you've wrestled with God in silence, and now you rise, not because the pain is gone, but because you've harvested it. And what you carry now isn't heavy, it's holy. The divine exchange. Why God turns your pain into power and your story into strategy. There's a moment in every chosen soul's life when heaven leans in and whispers, now. Not when you're polished, not when you've figured it all out, not when your life looks perfect on the outside, but when your heart is cracked wide open, when your hands are trembling but empty, when your soul finally stops resisting and simply surrenders. That's the moment the divine exchange begins. That's when God takes everything that was meant to destroy you and repurposes it to build others. That's when your pain becomes power and your story becomes strategy. Not for ego, not for attention, but for impact. You see, God never wastes pain. He recycles it, He repurposes it, He re-engineers it. Every tear, every betrayal, every sleepless night, it gets woven into the very fabric of your purpose, because the plan was never about just getting you out of the fire. It was about making you fireproof. And now, when you speak from that place, when you live from that frequency, you don't just inspire. You activate. You awaken what's dormant in others. You spark remembrance. You become the signal in a world full of noise. But here's the part that most people miss. This power doesn't come by chance. It comes through exchange. You don't get to keep the bitterness and receive the blessing. You don't get to hold on to the resentment and expect divine clarity. You have to trade. Trade the shame for wisdom. Trade the trauma for truth. Trade the heartbreak for holy authority. And that trade happens the moment you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "God, how do you want to use this?" When you ask that question, something shifts in the spirit. You begin to see patterns where you once saw pain. You begin to recognize divine fingerprints in places you thought were godless. You begin to realize that your story isn't a burden, it's a blueprint. And that blueprint isn't random, it's surgical, it's precise. It's been designed by a God who sees the end from the beginning and knew that your wounds would one day be someone else's way out. Let me ask you something sacred and uncomfortable. What if the very thing you've been hiding is the exact thing God wants to highlight? What if your most shameful chapter is the one that carries the most anointing? What if your story in all its mess and mystery is the strategy someone else has been begging God to send? That's the divine exchange. It's not about erasing the past, it's about redeeming it, owning it, offering it, laying it at the feet of God and saying, "Use this, use me." And when you do that, when you stop disqualifying yourself based on what you've been through and start realizing that what you've been through is what qualifies you, that's when heaven moves through you, not just around you, through you. You become the miracle. You become the message. You become the evidence that God is real, not because you've escaped pain, but because you've transcended it, because you've found purpose in it, because you didn't let it define you, you let it refine you. That's what the world is starving for. Not more perfect lives, not more filtered stories. It's starving for real ones, for people who carry the oil of survival and the fire of transformation. For people who aren't afraid to say, "I've been through the valley and here's what I found on the other side." For people who know suffering and still choose service, who know loss and still choose love. That's who God uses. That's who shifts nations. That's who you are. So don't despise what broke you. Don't hide what hurt you. Don't bury what made you weep. Bring it to the altar. Let it be the offering. Let it be the strategy. Because God doesn't just want to heal you, He wants to multiply you. And everything you thought disqualified you, that's the raw material for the movement He's building through you. You are not just a survivor, you're the seed of a revolution, and the world has no idea what's about to rise from your ashes. Because now you don't just carry a story, you carry a strategy from the throne room itself. And that's not just power, that's purpose, that's kingdom, that's God's plan for you. And it's only just beginning.